What we're going to talk about today is something that very few of us have: balance. You ever feel unbalanced? There's all, whether it's food, you always eat kind of one thing or whatever. I'll never forget one of our kids in the youth group. He's grown up now, but all he would eat would be a chicken nugget. And we finally talked him into going to camp. And the agreement for him to go to church camp was we had to buy a case of chicken nuggets in the back just for him. And he'd microwave some for breakfast, for lunch, and for supper. And I think he made it to about his junior year of high school before he ate anything besides processed chicken nuggets. And he's still alive. He looks healthy. But goodness, how many of us have seen the babies that are orange because they love carrots? Have you ever seen that? All right. And every once in a while you'll see something like that. You have balance with food. How about balance with work? Work-life balance. It seems like that's really hard to get a hold of. How many churches? Yes, sir.
Our North, former minister to Madison,
yes,
wrote an excellent book called Balance.
Yeah. And I love that book. The book called Balance by churches. We got some unbalanced churches, right? I mean, all they preach is truth. Some of them, all they preach is grace. And you preach one to the detriment of the other, it becomes an unbalanced church, an unhealthy church. And so in every aspect of life, we need to seek balance. But what happens is as we're going through, it is just difficult to long-term keep that balance where it needs to be. So that's what we're talking about today, is this idea of balance. Too much of anything else is tedious. And so as we talk about balance, we're going to talk about oppression for a little bit and how oppression is life out of balance. Read verse 1 with me. Then I returned and considered all the oppression that's done under the sun, and look, the tears of the oppressed, but there's no comforter. On the side of the oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter. You look around the world, you see oppression in just so many instances. Whether it be children in Africa or Asia who are starving, whether it be totalitarian governments, dictators here and there across the world who are oppressing their people, whether it be economic inequities, where people are working, where people are trying, but they're not able, not only to not get ahead, but they're not able to even tread water the way they should be. And we look around and we see so often where these things are happening. And as we look around, Solomon is talking, remember if you talked about the last chapter, we went through that balance. There's a time for everything under the sun. Then we talked about this idea of life, and yet not only is there a sense of meaningless, but it's a sense of a lot of pain and oppression happening everywhere in the world. And we look around the world, and the problem is we can't fix everything, can you? It's a story about the young boy who had gotten up in the morning on the beach, and as he's running down the beach or walking down the beach, his mother's watching him, and he sees all the starfish that are on the beach. And there's just thousands of them. They've all washed up with the tide, and the tide's pulled back, and the starfish are now just being exposed to the sun. The birds are coming in and eating them. And so the boy's going down, and he's getting a starfish, he's throwing it in the water, and then he's picking up another one and throwing it in the water. And the mother says, that's silly, because there's no way you'll be able to save all those starfish. There's thousands of them on this beach. And he says, well, I can save one. And he says, as long as I save one, the world's a better place. And really, that's the way we need to look at life. 7 billion people, maybe getting close to 8 billion people upon the face of this earth. In our lifetime, however long that may be, are we going to preach the gospel to every single person? I hope so. But man, we've got to get on the ball if we're going to do it. But what God wants you to do is at least focus on one. And if all of you save one person this year, and then those two save a person next year, it won't be long until the whole world knows the gospel. And so don't be oppressed by all the people that are lost. Save one. Save more. Try to make it where you don't go to heaven alone. All right, look at verses 2 and 3. Therefore I praise the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who never existed, who has never seen the evil work that is done under the sun. For how many of us do we look at the world and we think, this world would have been better if that person had never been born? Now that's dark, isn't it? But you see some people who are just in a very difficult situation, and there's really not a lot of hope, which is there. A girl I went to college with, she started a foundation. She lives in Nashville. She started a foundation that helps kids who have been born in war-torn countries. She's down in the Congo, is where her group is. Her husband's there now. She's still in Nashville. But she's been talking quite a bit because they're in the midst of a war. Some people come from Nigeria all the way down to Central Africa, down to Congo. And some of it is Islam versus Christianity. More of it is selfish people just attacking. And they're coming in around where her village of all these children are who are going through this deep therapy, trying to make them right. And they're killing and they're raping and everything else, all these people who are around, and they're working with the U.S. government and whoever else they can to try to protect this group. So every once in a while in the news, you'll see something about the Congo president asking the U.S. for this or that. A lot of it is that background which is going on with that village of the children, although they don't always say that on the news. And you look at those children and you see, they're in a tough plight. And sometimes when we see the suffering, we think, I don't know. They're born, but man, is that really a blessing as their life is so oppressed? Now, I've got some passages, if you got the notes, Job 3, I wish I'd never been born. And he goes through chapter 3 talking about how pitiful his life is and how he wishes that God would just erase the calendar so his birth would have never happened. And also Jeremiah is the same way, when Jeremiah is so deep and dark and everything else. And so what you see here is Solomon is looking at some very deep, dark stuff here. And as you go about and seeing that. Now, as you look at verse 4, every toil and skillful work a man has is envied by his neighbor. This is vanity and grasping for the wind. Has your neighbor mowed yet? When your neighbor mows, you kind of get the shakes. It's like, they're doing yard work. I better make my yard look better than their yard, right? Now, I'm not quite that way. My belief is as long as the neighbors don't talk, you're okay. But there's some guys who take their yard work super serious, right? Whatever you have, whatever you accomplish, there's likely to be somebody who's jealous. Well, why does he have that? And why is he able to do that? And I'm over here, and it goes back and forth with that. Now, that's really how world civilizations work, is the jealousy, which is always there. And sometimes that jealousy actually helps feed whatever may be there. You look at the conquests that have gone on across the world, a lot of times that's due to envy. Whether you're looking at the Mongol conquest coming across the steppes of Asia, whether you look at the Spaniards working their way through South America searching for gold, whether you look at some of the fights that happened in Africa, all over the world, many of these battles are due to envy. Many of these battles are due to a person having the wrong thought. Now, does envy ever attack a church? It sure can. What's a way that envy can attack a church? That church is bigger than my church, right? That means they must be doing something wrong. How many times do you hear somebody say that? Or so-and-so, they get to sing more than, this person. They get to lead singing more often. Or this child in a youth group is treated differently than that child in a youth group. And, there's a lot of times where church conflicts happen, and it's due to jealousy, it's due to pride, it's due to us not being satisfied with what we have and looking towards other people. And really, what should our accomplishments be for? Should it be to make us better than everybody else? It should be for the glory of God, shouldn't it? It should be for us to praise God and to honor Him. Now, 4 through 6, kind of painful. Again, I saw that For all toil and skillful work, there's a man who's envied by his neighbor. This is vanity and grasping for the wind. Look at verse 5. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. You ever see a person not willing to work? They don't want to get up early like everybody else does. They just fold their hands. They want to sit on the couch and watch video games. They just fold their hands. They want to not go to work. They want everybody else to work for them. They fold their hands. And what does that person end up doing? What's it say? They consume their own flesh. They consume themselves. You have people who create increase, and then you have people not willing to do that work that eat that increase. And they end up hurting themselves. They end up hurting those who love them because they're full. They're not willing to work. They're not willing to step out and do those things as far as working. Now look here in verse 6. Better a handful of quietness and both hands full, together with toil, is a grasping of the wind. Okay? Here's a guy who works night and day. He works all day, maybe does a day job from 8 to 5, goes home, he's got a side job from 6 to 10, then he comes home, eats, sleeps, does stuff around the house to make the house work well, starts a whole cycle, and he does that his whole life, and he accumulates a lot of stuff, and then what happens to all of his stuff? Goes to somebody who doesn't appreciate it. And so you've got these contrasts. You've got this one guy who's not willing to work, that ends up consuming himself and his neighbors because they have to take care of him. And on the other side, you have this guy who is doing everything and working so hard, and it's still just a grasping for the wind. He still is not accomplishing what he wants to and what he needs. And so we see there the issues and the problems that's happening here. I returned and saw vanity under the sun. There is one who is without a companion, has neither a son nor brother, and yet there's never an end to all of his labors. He's never satisfied by riches, by what he ever asks. We've got a few more minutes. We're going to go a little bit beyond the notes because I kind of want to work through this chapter a little bit more. So you may have to work in your Bible where we're going. But what this passage is talking about is a person who is so caught up with work that he loses his family. He's so caught up with work that he loses his friends. He's so caught up with work, he loses himself. And at the end, is that man a success story? Money goes somewhere else. You don't take it to the grave with you. And even if you're fabulously wealthy, at the end, if you have no friends, if you have no purpose, what does it matter? And so what we're looking at here, again, is that word balance. You've got to have the balance. Some people say, I don't want to work. That's unbalanced. Some people say, I'll work day and night. That's unbalanced. Some people are willing to give up everything to retain that one thing. That's losing balance. Again, we've got to learn to seek after balance. Now, look at verse 9, and you recognize this from Amos also. Two are better than one. They have a good reward for their labor. If a person falls, one will lift up his companion, but woe to him who's alone when he falls. He has no one to help him again. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. What Solomon is saying here is, even though you don't feel like it, you are a social creature. It's become very popular for, I think, the majority of people to say, I'm an introvert. I don't want to be in a crowd. I don't want to be around other people. I don't want the pressure of a relationship. I don't want all these things. Life is so much easier if everything comes across the way we should. And what we see here is it's important that man not be alone. It's important for us to be right. Ken, I am so glad you're here. Bill has been acting up. Yes, I'm glad that you're here. Ken is here, Bill, so you better behave. Yes, sir. Yep. Ken tells me every morning, I'm here to watch the general. So there we go. All right, good. All right. And so we are social creatures. We're put on this earth to care for someone and to have someone care for us. Now, sometimes we look at that and we say, well, I'm a widow. Or sometimes we look at that and say, I'm single. Sometimes we look at that and say, well, the person I'm with, they're sick. But God has created us to be around other people, and that's one of the beauties of the Lord's church. God put us here as a church to care for one another, to take care of one another. God put us here as a church for us to spend time together. Now, I'm very strong about the doctrinal aspects of the church, very strong on that. But in some ways, some of the most important work that happens in a church happens in the foyer. When we see each other, when we know each other by name, when we are sitting together, talking to one another, spending time together, those things matter. Those things are important. And sometimes I've been so zealous in my preaching that I'm like, oh, we need to keep on the subject, and we need to always be talking about Jesus. And yes, that's true. But when we're sitting around talking about our onions that go in our dressing, when we go around and we're talking about basketball, we're going around talking, those are just some of the conversations this morning that were going on. It's important for us to share life. It's important for us to care for one another. It's important for us to participate in one another's lives. And so as you think about that, it goes back to balance and how we are with one another, how we are working together. It's not all about me, and it's not all about everybody else, but there needs to be that balance which is there. Social interaction. Important in the home, Genesis 2:18, not good for man to be alone. Important in the church, Hebrews 10:24 and 25. Important even in the government. Okay? Now, 13 and 16. Better a poor and wise youth than an old foolish king who will be admonished no more. For he comes out of prison to be king, and although he is born poor in his kingdom, I saw the living who walk under the sun. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. There is no end of all the people over whom he was made king. Yet those who come afterwards will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also vanity and grasping in the wind. The cycle. And maybe I read that too fast for you to see the cycle. Did you know there's a cycle to life? And it aggravates us. It aggravates us. Let me explain the cycle. Youth has to be behind wisdom, but youth will eventually overtake wisdom. Let me put it in the aspect of a job, okay? You're the young whippersnapper at the job. You got the job. You're the youngest person who's ever been there. You're the most highly educated person who's been there. You have the latest technology and everything else. You show up at work. Does everybody want to listen to you? No, because at the plant, they've always done it this way, and they'd prefer not to have to mess with what you're saying. But as time goes on, as you become more educated, as you learn the ropes, those older people will either retire or become obsolete, and now you get to be in charge. And then they hire a young whippersnapper who's going to tell you how all the things have to work. And you're not going to listen to them because you're going to say, well, this is how all things we've always done it. And eventually you get older and you become obsolete, and then he is there. And then the next day they hire a young whippersnapper. And there they go along. And so what Solomon is saying is recognize there is a cycle to life. I once was a newlywed. I once had little children. I once had teenagers. They finally moved out. Now they're having babies. And now I'm the old grandparent that gets to wave as the taillights are leaving. But life doesn't stop here. It continues along. Eventually, I'll be old, obsolete, out of the picture. Those young kids, my young sons, are going to be grandparents, and then we start to cycle over. Now, from my personal perspective, it's always been all about me, and I don't realize that where those other people stand, I will be there eventually, or I used to be there. And what Solomon is talking about as we get to the end of that chapter, once again, is balance. Recognize that today is just one day in your life. And it may be the worst day ever. But tomorrow's going to come, and maybe it'll be better. Today is just one day in your life. And it may be the best day ever. But it's just one day, and it'll be over, and tomorrow's going to come. And so you have to be balanced at everything that you see as it comes along and as it works.